Oh man. So for future video watchers, this is kind of a overview of Ember.
So Kyle, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of trying to figure out like basic stuff. Like, I mean, I'm getting more accustomed to the like concept of containers and templates and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'm having, I mean, obviously the state's a little further down
Mm-hmm.
in some of the handler type stuff. But
Uh-huh.
one thing I'm having trouble with is how do I get at the state at the very initialization of the app? Because it doesn't look like it
Ah.
can quote unquote handle the start. And so like step one, when someone comes to the web page and we want to
Mm-hmm.
know if they're logged in or not, I don't know how to like grab onto that part of the app and start checking local storage or whatever I'm going to do.
Gotcha. I got you, boo.
All right.
So let's talk about this a bit. So before I forget, like app, state, initialization. All right. So I've drawn the diagram a couple times of opinionated and unopinionated approaches to development. Smaller. And if this is come on, there we go. If this is unopinionated and this is opinionated, Ember is about as far out here as you can get. React is about as far out here as you can get. And then, like, as a geometric average of all possible frameworks, if we made a triangle of that included Angular or something also, Vue would kind of be right in the middle. So in this context of SPAs, what React does is it gives you a way to render components with reactive state. That is it. That is all it does. It doesn't help you handle your routing, although there are plugins for that. It really doesn't help you manage what that state is, although there are plugins for that. And the expectation is that, oh, React just solves this little teeny tiny problem, and you can kind of build your own framework out of like, going with a shopping cart and just picking out, oh, React router, oh, MobX. I can kind of build my own thing. Ember, complete opposite of this. With Ember, you get that like reactive templating system. It also, so we'll say, reactive templating. And before I go on, somebody give me a definition of reactive. What do I mean by that? What does it mean for a template to react?
When there's a change to state, it
Yep,
can conditionally render or can change based on that state change.
correct. Eloquently put. Yeah, if there's some change in the state, we re-render the template. That's it. So okay, so Ember will handle the reactive templating part for us. It also has the best router in the business. It also has it's like Active Record, except even more. So really robust state management. But like with Active Record, we were concerned with how we communicate with the database. So I want to be able to say dog.all and have it handle all the database connection for me, write the query for me, all that kind of shit. What do you think that would be on the client side? Because the client doesn't talk to the database, but it has a similar kind of problem. What is it? What would my equivalent of dog.all need to do? How do you get data? You need to get a list of a bunch of dogs for your app. What are you going to do?
A fetch call in
Fetch
your
call.
program?
Yeah, to some API, right? Cool. That's what like Ember's version of Active Record is doing for you. It handles that fetch call. It also handles like what that URL is supposed to be. So if it's some base URL slash dogs, Ember can guess that. It doesn't need you to tell it. You can just say dog dot get all, and it'll handle everything else for you,
Oh,
including. Go ahead.
so like instead of like of a drawn out fetch statement, literally there's like a built-in method
Correct.
that's like get all, and it just does it. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, and like here's a bonus on top of that. Let's say you've already gotten all the dogs, or you've gotten all of them, but some have been added to the back end. Ember keeps track of what it has requested. And so the next time you do give me all the dogs, it'll give them its locally saved dogs back. So you'll have those immediately. And then it'll make the request. And if there's any new ones that came back, then it'll add those. And so it'll react with that. But you get an answer right away because you already have that data locally. You can code that kind of stuff out in React, but you certainly don't get it for free. You do with Ember. So robust state management. This is maybe the thing that irritates me the most in Vue and React is they act like this is like a weird thing that like, oh, just come up with whatever pattern you want. But I'm going to call this application level state management and behavior. So for example, which user is currently logged in? That might be a thing that in React you do at the app level, and then you either pass that down as props. Oh, well, people don't like prop drilling too much. So if some way inner component needs access to the logged in user, you can either prop drill that or have your component get it directly out of Redux or something like that. Or you can use the context API. But here's my beef with that. Like all of those things are now allowing every component to access every fucking piece of data throughout your app. And it's real easy to tie yourself in knots doing that. So Ember has the concept of services. A service is like something that explicitly should be available app-wide. So it's something like a logged in user. Or I made an app once that had a media player in it, and you needed to be able to start and stop the media player or know what thing is currently playing or whatever anywhere in the app. Cool. So I had a media player service that I could inject into any component. And now they can kind of tunnel through the ether and communicate with just that service. The service can also have state. It can have shared methods that should be available everywhere. But like that's an explicit pattern, and it has a name, and it has generators for it. So if you liked Rails G, guess what? You got it in Ember again. And like that shouldn't be too surprising. In fact, if a lot of this is feeling very Rails-esque, it's because Ember was started by the former Rails core team. A lot of them split from Rails to jump over to Ember. And so a lot of the conventions carry over. Other cool stuff in Ember. You know how much I love Cypress, and so this one kind of hurts, but all of the built-in testing stuff in Ember is dope. It's just really fast, way faster than Cypress, because it can make some assumptions about how your app is structured because every Ember app looks the same way. And so it allows the test runner to run a lot more quickly. But yeah, testing in Ember is a pretty delightful experience. You can also do things like render a component in isolation and see it visually. Like that's essentially what a shallow render is on like Enzyme or something like that with React. But it's hard to actually see just the component, especially if like you're trying to style it or debug it or something like that. That's not as hard to do with Ember's testing. And then like the last like big benefit I would say is the conventions. So since I haven't made an Ember app in 2.5 years, I was going through the tutorial again this morning, and I was like, oh yeah, if I just name this template the same thing as I named my route, I don't have to wire those things up. It just, they know they're supposed to go together. And back when I wrote a lot of Ember, the thing that I missed the most as soon as I left is like all of that wiring up code, because it doesn't add any value. It doesn't make the product better. And it's not something that like you should do differently on different apps. There's like one right way to do it. So why are you making me do it? Why are you creating a situation where like you're just waiting for me to make a mistake, basically? And so I've always felt like when I write Ember code, the only code that I'm writing is stuff that's specific to my app. I'm never doing any like stuff that would apply to any app because that's already built into it. So that's kind of like my compare and contrast with Ember and React. Hit me with some questions.
I got one. So, kind of in that, like, I know it's like comparing Rails to Ember as like apple to oranges in some sense, but is the reason why Ember, in your opinion, is harder to learn is because the documentation isn't as robust as it is for Rails, where Rails, it feels like there's just a lot of references?
No, I think the Ember documentation is pretty killer, honestly. I think the thing that is a big barrier to adoption with Ember is it's hard to do anything if you don't know everything. And so like, cool, it comes with all of these things and you have to use all of them. And so like really before you can get anything to even show up on the page, you have to touch the generators, you have to touch the router, you have to touch like the state management potentially. There's just a lot that you have to do to get anything going, which is not the case with React. You can feel successful with React very quickly. And I think that's also part of its downside is that a lot of people get really like high on like how cool they feel like with React. And part of it is they're doing horror show, bad idea, terrible patterns, but like React doesn't have an opinion about what good and bad code is. And so you end up thinking you know React, and then you join a React team just to find out that they write apps completely differently than you do. Or like you might not even know that you're writing bad React code. And that's not possible. If you write bad Ember code, your app doesn't compile and nothing shows up. But you have to sit through the frustration of trying to learn the tool so much longer before you feel like you get a victory.
Kyle, can you talk a little more about where state lives?
Mm-hmm. So
It's a pretty broad, big open question, but
that actually leads into a good, I think, example of what Ember architecture kind of looks like. Baby, what do you need? Well, mommy's working right now, baby. Okay, so I've got this router, and just like in Rails, its job is to match an HTTP request to a route. But this part is different than Rails. What happens next is it sends it to a route object. The route object's job is arranging all of the state. So this is what's going to, this is where like dog.all would get called. Or let's say you don't want to use any of Ember's state management stuff. This is where you'd write the fetch request. But you're saying, oh, for the thing that you're trying to route, I need the following data to be available. So all of that gets handled in the route. And then, so that's, route is talking to your models. It might also just be talking to some rando API. And one of the coolest tricks I've ever seen in Ember is, let's say we're using the Pokemon API. we could build out a set of Ember models for that and do something like Pokemon.all and get all of the Pokemon in our app. We could do like very active record style things like find by name Pikachu and then get that thing back without writing any of the like fetch calls for that. We can just use it like they were models from our app. It's pretty cool. All right, so the route is in charge of getting all that data together, and it can have subroutes that also do those things. Yeah! And that thing might also get some model data. Cool. So once it gets through all of that, it does two things. The route has a controller and a template. And these two things are bound together. So properties on your controller are visible in your template, and your template can call methods that are on your controller, or it can call actions that are on your controller. Then so this works the other direction also. So I'm going to rewrite that as properties come in there, actions get called from templates on controllers, and then you can send those actions back to the route object. And so you go, oh, I want to add a dog. So you click the button on the template, and that calls the add dog action on your controller. And your controller goes, oh, sick. You want to add a dog? That sounds like a data thing. I'm going to send that action to the route. And then the route goes dog.create, and you pass in the shit and whatever else. That's how that data flows. So to answer Doug's original question about, all right, well, I got to log in the user. I got to do all that kind of stuff. That happens in the route. And if you'll remember from like the auth series of lessons, we use the application controller that's everything inherits from. Same thing in Ember. There's an application controller that also every other controller can kind of see. There's an application route that every single route will hit. So if there's something that needs to be done for every route, put it in the application route. Neat, more questions.
And anybody who wants to ask, I just had one. I just want to get some clarity. So the router is going to the router object, and then from the router object, it goes to a route object.
Correct.
And then from there, it goes to a controller, which can then pass down props to a template where like the functionality from those props, whatever you want to do with them, and then it kind of pushes the actions back up.
Correct.
And then if you wanted for it to like persist to your backend, it would then go from the route object to the router object, and then that's where your fetch calls happen? Is that how it?
No.
Okay.
The route object is where those fetch calls would happen. The router's job is just making sure that the right route hierarchy gets rendered. It's the route object's job to fetch data, to create data, like all that stuff happens in your route objects.
And along with that, the model's just a local cache of stuff that's in your backend, is what you're kind of saying?
Kind of. Just like active record, you can also define relationships. So if we have dogs and owners in there, I can declare that relationship in those model objects, honestly, almost the exact same way that we do it in Rails. And now I can do dog.owners in my controllers. And that might be two totally different APIs, but the cool thing about having your route handle all of that is now these don't have to know where the data comes from. They don't care how the sausage gets made. This would be like equivalent to the idea of containers in React. Is what do I give a shit if you hard coded the state data or fetched it from an API or fetched it from 30 APIs? It's kind of not my business. So that stuff gets abstracted away, and all the controller and template know is like, there's such a thing as a dog model, and I am using its name.
So because one of the main devs from Rails made Ember, is it common to see Ember front, Rails backend, like almost like complementary wise, almost like in syntax, or is that like not important at all?
It's not important, but it is common because since they're both super opinionated, if you like opinionated front ends, there's a pretty good chance you like opinionated back ends. And Rails is probably the most robust opinionated back end. So you see them often for that reason, but it's still, the point of HTTP is that we don't have to know client and server don't have to know anything about how each other are implemented. We just communicate each other over this wire in this format. So like most of my career, I've written Express backends for Ember apps, and it's fine.
So let's say I see some cool like node package I want to use. Are these like, are these interchangeable, or do I have to, is there some sort of adapter between Ember and node packages, or
Nope.
they're all JavaScript, so they just all work? Or
Nope. Just import it.
Okay.
Use it like normal. So if that's something like Lodash, yeah, just install Lodash, import it into some file, start using it. There's also Ember plugins, and there's a whole like format for this. A lot of them are also just NPM packages, but NPM plugins add like one more layer on top of that will give you things like generators and a variety of other stuff. So like, for example, allowing you to just use Sass anywhere in your application. Like there's an Ember plugin for that you don't have to do any other special wiring for.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because usually I'm like, you look at Cloud API to do whatever, like AI crap, for whatever kind of function you want to do. And it usually doesn't have like how would I do this in Ember type option. So you would just kind of use the Node version, or like kind of like a Node.js kind of version of the directions, and it's the same sort of.
Correct. That stuff should just work out of the box in Ember.
Okay, cool.
One more cool thing about the route object. So this is responsible for like getting all that state together and then putting it on the controller. You can block rendering of that template until, say, a fetch call has completed, which is really nice. Vue can't do that either, and that drives me nuts. If I don't want a route transition to finish until that fetch call wraps up, for example, I don't have a great way to do that in any of the other front-end frameworks. But if you return a promise from the model hook on a route, it will wait for that promise to resolve before it keeps going. That way you don't end up with like, oh, here's the dogs. Oh, there's no dogs. Never mind, there's all the dogs. Like, you can craft a much better user experience that way. What else?
Were you saying that LinkedIn is a Ember-based app?
Correct.
Are there other apps that are like good to look at in terms of, and like how can you tell when you're looking at like an Ember front end framework versus like something else?
So I know that LinkedIn is an Ember app because all of the core team members work there now. So it's still an independent framework. It's not owned by Microsoft or anything like that. But if you want to think of Angular as Google's product and React as Facebook's product, Ember is kind of Microsoft's at this point. And the easiest way to tell that something is made with Ember, well, there's two big hints. One is that, let's see if this will have it up. Anytime you're looking at the local host for something, it's at port 4200. 4200 is the Ember like default port. So the other way that you do that is with the Ember inspector. So just like there's React dev tools and Vue dev tools, there's also Ember dev tools, and they turn on whenever you're on an Ember site. As far as other like big apps that are Ember projects, Heroku. Heroku's like management console is an Ember app. Up until like 2 years ago, I think Twitch was an Ember app. Skylight, which is like an analytics platform. That's the other one that like Ember core team members work on. Sentry, which is a popular tool for like bug reporting and error logging and stuff. That's an Ember app. So here's the kind of interesting thing about it. Oh, another thing that's really common is consultancies. Consultancies use Ember a lot because it's so fucking fast to build with, and time is of the essence. Time is your money as a consultant. So you can get stuff up and running and bulletproof really fast with Ember. So you'll see a lot of consultants use it. And like you don't hear a ton about it on like Hacker News or anything anymore. In part for the same reason you don't hear much about Java or Rails or PHP. And it's not because they're dead. It's because they are so successful that there's kind of not all that much to talk about anymore. Nothing is new. Like nobody goes to Hacker News and goes, hey guys, guess what? I was able to be super productive again today and do my job exactly as I've done it every day for the last few years. What? And so like that is how like technology tools die because there's just nothing really sexy to talk about anymore. Over in chat.
So no, it's not necessarily like a technology thing, but why did you end up moving away from using Ember? Just because you haven't had the need to build a project, or you found something else you wanted to try out, or?
Because of the industry that I'm in, and like I sure like staying employed, so couldn't find a whole lot of code schools that would let me teach Ember full time.
Gotcha.
So I picked up Vue because it seemed to be one that was still like really hot in the public's eye, but retained some of the good lessons learned, I think, from the Ember era. And that's been largely true. I do like building Vue apps a lot. And a thing that I think Vue does extremely well that this is like the only like, oh, I'm going to miss this from when I was kind of playing with Ember a little bit today, is single file components. That is such a like brilliant idea. Having the template and the script and the style in one file. But and that like admittedly is a little gnarly in Ember. So all your templates are in one folder, all your controllers are in one folder, all of your component JS files are in one folder, all your styles are in one folder. And there was like a really big push like 5 years ago to they would still be 3 different files, but they would be in one folder. It's called pods, and I don't think it's actually like taken off quite the way I was expecting. So because like all the instructions still have you doing it the old way. Vue does that a lot cleaner, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, it was mostly just like I wanted to stay employed, and I work in a very particular industry, and nobody else in the industry really uses it. But there are still Ember like apps and companies. So for example, Envoy is what a lot of the Ember folk in Denver do. RTD is Ember. So, and also, like I've made the joke a couple times, there's no such thing as an unemployed Ember developer, because like while there aren't that many jobs out there, how many jobs do you need? Because all of those teams are looking for people that like working with Ember, and they tend to get jobs pretty quickly.
Okay.
Is there any like tutorials that you find to be pretty helpful for like learning Ember, or courses and so on and so forth?
The guides on the site are super good, and they're made largely by a guy named David Baker, who's based out of Denver, actually, and runs the Ember Meetup now. So those are probably your best resource, but there was another one that was really popular for a while by Adolfo Buies, Ember, something like that. Ember 101. This was really actively maintained for a while, yeah, up until a couple years ago. I'll bet this is still like a pretty good resource. It might not be 100% up to date, but this was probably like everybody's go-to after the guides, something like this. But the guides are great. Start there. What else?
We talked a lot about all the benefits. What, if anything, are the drawbacks to using Ember?
Sure. So a drawback is that, and this is like the first one that anybody will point to, is that it's so bloated. It's huge. If you deploy an Ember app, you end up deploying like 300 or 400 megabytes of shit. And people are like, how? Oh my God, how do you get it? I was like, well, the computer doesn't mind that it's a lot, for one. And people are like, it's just too slow. It's real slow. And that's kind of true if you're not doing anything. But the reality is that, like, I'm not aware of a whole lot of apps that don't need a router, that don't need state management, that don't need, like, a lot of the solutions that come out of the box, that don't need testing. Like, if your app doesn't need those, it will run way faster if you use just about any other tool. For the other 99% of apps, Ember runs faster than what you will likely stitch together yourself out of like all these disparate parts. But there are tiny apps that Ember is not always a great fit for. I still think it's really fast to prototype with. So like back in the day, I still did all my prototypes with Ember, but they will run slower because it's designed for like ambitious apps, big enterprise kind of stuff. And so if you put it in a speed race, probably not going to win. Another reason to not use Ember is if you need to hire a bunch of devs to work on it. For one, since it's super fussy about how you write your code, you need to find devs that are okay with being told how to write their code. And those aren't in steady supply. So, and most of them are already Ember developers. So that's a challenge. Additionally, there's like a class of developers that read the Stack Overflow survey and see that like Ember is a tool to stay away from. And so they like think of it as career suicide to work at a shop that's Ember based. So if you have to do a whole bunch of hiring, there's some risks there that you should be aware of. And then, yeah, and I guess if you are a dev who wants to handcraft everything yourself, like Ember's not going to let you. You're going to have a miserable time, so don't do it. Yeah, those are some good reasons to not use Ember. What else?
I guess if we have time,
Yeah.
could we like take a look at an example project of yours, possibly in Ember, or I don't know, like
That's
some good Ember code?
Yeah, so let me see if I can find an old Ember app in my repo somewhere. All right. any of my starred repos for any of these Ember apps. Mother Brain might have been. Oop, this is just a backend. Let's see. Nope. Oh, Barkwire. Barkwire's a goodie. All right, awesome. This is Number app. So let's pull this down, and let's take a little tour. Okay, so in the app folder, we got everything all split out into the different things that kind of make it up. So if we look at the router has two routes in it. It's a route for all dogs and a route for one dog. Now if we look at the routes, we have the route that shows up when you don't go to anything. If you just go to the URL, it should immediately transition you over to the dog's route. And then in the dog route, dogs. Hey, this is like our dog.all equivalent. Is we're going into the store, find me every dog. And so if we already have them, they come back right away. Otherwise, it makes the request. And then that request is made by an adapter. And so I say, I'm using REST patterns here. So by default, you can just assume that I'm using REST. And this is the base URL for that. But with that find all, it'll add the /dogs to the end automatically. I can override that if I need to, but otherwise I can just use the convention. The model for that is this. This is saying that every dog has this shape to it. It's going to have those 4 properties. One of the neat things is that I can add my own properties if I want to. I can say, oh, and I want to concatenate their name and description. I want to restructure this thing that came back some other way. So I can do computed properties that are based on stuff that comes in from the model. And then with that model, let's see what I do. So that comes in there. It's going to render that template. If I don't have anything that I need a controller for, you don't have to have one. It'll auto-generate one for you with like all of the defaults and stuff. But I don't have any actions on this page. All I'm doing is showing a list of dogs. Well, that came in from the route anyway. So it's going to auto-generate a controller that has all that stuff available. And so I can each through the model and then make links to like specific dog pages on this. So this uses HTML bars syntax. It's not quite the same as Vue. It's not quite the same as JSX, but it's of all of those, it's honestly my favorite. So the way that we loop through things is we have these each blocks like that. If you ever did any of the ERB stuff, it's a little inspired by that. But I like that a lot better than like in Vue, this would be V4 There we go. All right, so all right, if I take a look at the tests, there's 3 different levels of tests in Ember. Acceptance tests, which are the kinds of tests that we would do with something like Cypress, end-to-end tests. Integration tests, which are for components. So if you want to check that a component renders a certain way when you give it certain properties, like this is how you do that. And then unit tests, which is like mostly individual functions and stuff. So an acceptance test in Ember looks kind of like this. So if I visit this URL, then I want to assert that these things are true. And I'll bet, even after all these years, this still works. Let's give it a shot. Whole lot of update warnings. I can't wait to see how insecure this is at the end. It'd be like, you have 430 severe vulnerabilities. Cool. 68, that's not that bad. All right, and if I Ember T, oops, Bower install. Do I even have Bower anymore? Man, that is old-timey. npm install Bower. So once upon a time, like now we have framework wars. We used to have dependency manager wars. So you would have npm and Bower, and there were like a couple others. Bower was Twitter's like big claim to fame. Now we just kind of have Yarn and npm. Yeah, even Bower doesn't recommend using Bower. Yeah, it was like a big scandal on the internet because it turned out that only one person was still working on Bower and he quit. And we're like, whoa! This like core piece of infrastructure on the web was just somebody's like project at night. Oops, not that. Bower install. I did it. npx Bower install. There we go. Still remember some stuff. All right, so let's see if my tests still work 3 years later. Yep, some didn't work. Oh, Phantom. It's funny, I was just talking about this with somebody at Flatiron yesterday, because Phantom is like a requirement during that like install step for like first day setup for your environment setup. And I wrote the Flatiron people and was like, why? Phantom was literally abandoned 4 years ago. And they're like, oh, good point. And then they took it out. So, all right, I'm not going to install Phantom. But anyway, that's an example of a number code base. What else?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So I saw someone